She was not listening on purpose. The elevator stalled between floors, lights dimmed, phones went silent. Two executives stepped inside, voices low, relaxed, careless. They assumed the pause erased formality. To them, the space felt private. To her, it felt exposed. She stood still, holding her laptop, breathing slowly, sensing something important was about to surface. The sentence arrived without emotion. Fire her once she finishes the module. No frustration, no conflict, just timing, just extraction. At that age, you recognize when language is administrative rather than personal. That is what made it dangerous. Decisions delivered calmly are the ones finalized. She did not interrupt. She did not shift or wait. She let the words settle and recorded them the way experience teaches you to record risk. The elevator hummed back to life. Floors passed. Doors opened. No one looked at her. That was the second mistake. She stepped out carrying more than a computer. She carried confirmation. Years of quiet contributions suddenly aligned into a clear picture. This was not about performance. It was about removal after utility. Walking back to her desk, she did not feel anger. She felt precision. At 50, panic is replaced by inventory. What do I control? What do I know? What do they underestimate? Her hands moved calmly, but her thinking accelerated. She reviewed dependencies, access, ownership, and timelines with clarity. By the time she sat down, the decision was complete. She would finish the module. She would do it perfectly. And she would build something else alongside it, silently, deliberately, without permission. Not to prove a point, but to protect her future. She was never the loudest voice in the room. Meetings passed with others selling ideas while she listened, annotated, and corrected details later. She did not chase visibility. She chased stability. Her value showed up after hours in clean logs, in systems that survived pressure without drama. She avoided office theater on purpose. No self-promotion, no alliances, no performative urgency. When something failed, she repaired it quietly and documented the fix, so it would not fail again. When a process was fragile, she reinforced it without credit. Her satisfaction came from continuity, not applause. What they saw was age. What they assumed was obedience. They mistook calm for passivity and silence for dependence. They believed experience could be harvested, summarized, and handed to someone cheaper. In their minds, once knowledge was transferred, the person became optional. They never noticed that she was the one connecting pieces others treated separately. She understood not only what the system did, but why it behaved the way it did under stress. She knew which shortcuts were safe and which would collapse the moment conditions changed. That depth does not announce itself. It accumulates. It learns patterns, remembers failures, and anticipates consequences before dashboards flash red. Removing her meant removing the memory of every past mistake the company survived. They thought they were cutting cost. In reality, they were severing the spine that held the operation upright. Everything still stood for a while, which made the decision feel justified. Experience rarely leaves noise behind. It leaves absence. And absence always charges interest later. They would learn that lesson slowly, expensively, with no one left. The module was not optional. It sat inside a legacy system layered with years of compromises, fragile dependencies, and undocumented behavior. One careless change could freeze operations across regions. Everyone knew the risk, which is why timelines were tight and tolerance for mistakes was non-existent. She approached it without drama. Requirements were clarified, assumptions challenged, edge cases tested early. She mapped every interaction, documented decisions, and built safeguards where others preferred shortcuts. Progress reports stayed brief, but the work underneath was exhaustive and precise. When delivery day arrived, the module performed exactly as requested. It passed reviews, survived stress tests, and integrated cleanly into production. Managers nodded, relieved, already shifting attention elsewhere. From their perspective, the value had been extracted and boxed. Alongside the official work, she maintained something separate. A private repository built quietly after hours, mirroring the core logic, but improving it. Cleaner structure, fewer assumptions, stronger resilience. This was not rebellion. It was professional insurance. Experience teaches a simple rule over decades of survival. Never let your understanding live entirely inside someone else's system. Access can vanish. Priorities change. Knowledge that is not anchored to you becomes disposable the moment budgets tighten. So she finished their module with care, then refined her own version with vision. One satisfied an obligation. The other prepared an exit. They received what they demanded. She kept what mattered. At that moment, leverage quietly shifted. The code existed in two places, but mastery lived in one. They did not notice. They would later. By then, the terms of the conversation would no longer be theirs. Time had already taken her side quietly. At night, when offices emptied and notifications stopped, she reopened the work. Not to rush, but to rethink. The original module had passed tests, yet hidden weaknesses remained, invisible unless you had lived through past failures. She stripped unnecessary layers, simplified logic, and rebuilt the foundation for speed and scale. Every shortcut others depended on was replaced with structure. Every assumption was challenged. The system grew lighter, stronger, and prepared for growth. This second build was not reactive. It anticipated failure before it happened. She addressed bottlenecks no report had flagged and reinforced components no one owned clearly. Experience guided decisions faster than meetings ever could. She solved problems that had not yet arrived. Capacity limits, upgrade paths, compliance risks, recovery scenarios. Each solution aligned quietly, forming an upgrade that would outperform theirs without explanation. There were no announcements, no presentations, no warnings. She prepared while others slept, refining documentation, securing ownership, and ensuring independence. By morning, the turning point already existed. This was the moment everything shifted. Not loudly, not visibly, but permanently. The leverage was built line by line, choice by choice, until the future belonged to her. She did not rush to use it. Preparation requires patience. When action finally came, it would feel sudden to everyone else, even though the outcome had already been decided long before. This build marked the quiet divide between employment and independence, between being managed and becoming unignorable. Nothing had exploded yet. That silence was exactly the point. It was built for endurance, not applause, and it would soon test which side truly understood the system they depended on daily survival. HR scheduled the meeting early, before coffee cooled and corridors filled. Smiles were measured, voices rehearsed, papers aligned neatly on the table. Budget realignment, strategic shift, appreciation for contributions were delivered with practiced calm, as if tone could soften outcome. She listened without interruption. Years of experience had taught her that explanations change nothing once timing is decided. She nodded slowly, acknowledged the process, and thanked them for clarity. No argument followed because none was required. Access revocation was discussed briefly, professionally. She provided credentials, signed documents, and closed her laptop with care. There was no counteroffer to negotiate, no plea to make. She had already moved beyond the room. Walking through the building, she noticed details others ignored. The hum of servers, the rhythm of processes she had stabilized for years. People glanced up politely, unaware that continuity was exiting quietly alongside her. They believed risk departed with her badge, keys, and access rights. What they missed was less visible. Memory does not clock out. It remembers why systems survived storms and how fragile decisions compound. The future walked out calmly, carrying lessons no document could replace. Outside, daylight felt unchanged, but direction had shifted. She paused once, not from doubt, but from awareness. Conflict does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it resolves quietly, the moment preparation meets opportunity. She stepped forward without urgency, already ahead of the timeline they believed they controlled. Calm is not surrender. It is confidence earned long before decisions are announced. That day closed one role, but opened something far larger, guided by memory, discipline, and time finally working for her alone today, 3 months after her departure. Timelines began to blur. What once closed on schedule now lingered unresolved. Clients noticed delays, then inconsistencies, then silence. Emergency patches multiplied, each one fixing yesterday's issue while creating tomorrow's. Confidence eroded quietly, meeting by meeting, email by email, as pressure accumulated. The replacement team worked hard, but without history. They treated alarms, not origins. Meetings filled with theories, dashboards, consultants. She had already mapped those failure paths years earlier. What looked like bad luck was predictable behavior triggered by stress, growth, and neglected structure. Internally, tension grew. Departments blamed each other. Leaders demanded speed without understanding cost. The system resisted every forced fix. Knowledge gaps widened because the person who connected decisions to consequences was no longer present to warn them early. Elsewhere, her work was running steadily. In a smaller company built deliberately, her upgraded version handled scale without noise. Contracts were signed by executives who asked about continuity, not titles. They recognized stability as value, not something extracted and discarded. The contrast widened each week. One side reacted. The other advanced. She did not celebrate their struggle, but she observed the outcome calmly. Experience had done its work. Systems remember their architects and eventually reveal who understood them deeply. By the time they acknowledged the damage, momentum was gone. Recovery required patience they no longer had. Her company, however, was already trusted, already embedded. Opportunity favors preparation, not reaction. That truth unfolded slowly, with consequences measured in lost years rather than dramatic collapse. There were no villains, only outcomes shaped by neglect, assumptions, and time moving forward without waiting for permission ever. They reached out quietly, one message first, then another. The tone was careful, almost respectful, stripped of authority. No apology appeared. Instead came questions, technical, procedural, urgent. They wanted explanations without admitting absence. She read each line slowly. Time had shifted the balance. The system was no longer theoretical to them. It was failing publicly. Meetings had grown longer. Confidence thinner. She recognized the pattern immediately. They asked for calls, reviews, guidance. She declined politely. Her calendar was full, building something stable. The answers they needed were already embedded elsewhere. Knowledge cannot be borrowed once it has moved on. This was not revenge. It was resolution. Experience does not argue or defend itself. It demonstrates through outcomes. What once sounded optional now felt critical. Silence carried more authority than any explanation. They finally saw the gap, not in resumes, but in results. Systems falter when memory is removed. She had moved forward calmly, while they studied what was missing. Vindication arrived without a word spoken. No meeting could recover what time had clarified. Trust follows continuity, not credentials. She closed the messages and returned to work, aware that demonstration had completed its final lesson. For professionals watching, this moment matters. Recognition often arrives late, when leverage has already shifted. Experience wins quietly, leaving others to study consequences instead of debating value. They did not lose her in the meeting. They lost her long before, when they assumed understanding could be extracted and replaced. That assumption finally introduced itself, without drama, through absence. The gap was visible now, measurable, undeniable, and no message could close it again in time or cost. If you are watching this and you have ever been underestimated, pause for a moment. This message is not about anger or revenge. It is about clarity. Experience does not shout for attention. It works quietly, building structures others rely on without realizing who placed each beam. Over time, you learn that value is not measured by visibility. It is measured by what continues to function when pressure rises. You stabilize chaos, prevent disasters, and correct mistakes before they reach meetings. That kind of contribution rarely trends, yet it carries organizations for years. Never fear being replaced. Replacement is part of every system. Fear staying in environments where structure is ignored, where memory is dismissed, and where decisions are made without understanding consequences. Those places consume experience instead of respecting it. At this stage of life, wisdom means choosing where your effort belongs. Work where continuity matters. Work where preparation is recognized. Work where silence is understood as mastery rather than absence. You do not need permission to protect your future. People who fire experience often discover too late that it was holding the vault together. By the time they notice, the door is already closed, and the knowledge they discarded is operating elsewhere, quietly, successfully, without them watching anymore. Your calm is not weakness. Your patience is not hesitation. It is accumulated judgment. When the right moment comes, you will move without noise, because the work was already done long before anyone questioned your relevance. Time always sides with those who build foundations instead of chasing applause, trends, titles, or validation. Experience endures. Systems remember. Outcomes speak. Always forward.